Mary McCord spent nearly 20 years as a federal prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. She litigated a case against the Wisconsin fake electors. She currently co-hosts the Webby Award MSNBC podcast, Prosecuting Donald Trump. Tom Joslin was a senior staffer on the January 6th committee and a principal drafter of their final report, and they both join me now. Mary, I think you guys have gotten a little time to look over this indictment. Your thoughts on what you've read?
Well, it's a very familiar conspiracy to me, having,
yes,
like you mentioned, been part of a team of lawyers that litigated against the Wisconsin fraudulent electors and two Trump attorneys. And so one of the things I was looking for in there, our case resolved with a settlement, which included permanent injunctive relief. The electors are never to do this again. The attorneys are never to help them do it again. But it also resulted in the release of some 1,600 emails and text messages that show the genesis of the scheme. And what I saw in this Arizona indictment is a lot of the things I saw in those text messages. So this scheme was concocted in Wisconsin by Trump campaign attorney Jim Troupis and his friend Ken Chesebro. Yes, Kenneth Chesebro, who has been pleaded guilty in Georgia, who is unindicted co-conspirator number 4 in this Arizona indictment. He is the one who came up with the idea. He had the beginnings of the idea just 5 days after the election, his first email to Mr. Troupis saying, you know, what about if an alternate slate of electors shows up on January 6th, throwing things into chaos unless the state legislatures then decide who the slate should be? Or we could throw such things into such chaos that the vote would go to the House. And what that means is the vote by the House under the 12th Amendment, when there's no winner, means every state gets one vote. It's not all 450 legislators. And one at that time, it was a 26 state majority, and that would have meant the election went to Trump. So what I saw then in this indictment is the communications after Mr. Troupis sent these memos that he asked Mr. Chesebro to write up to the White House. That's reflected in this indictment. Boris Epshteyn then said, hey, can you replicate this in the other states? And that's what set Mr. Chesebro off. Again, unindicted co-conspirator number 4 in this indictment, I'm certain, based on the allegations in the indictment, to working so closely with people like Kelly Ward and also attorneys in Arizona like Jack Wilenchek to make this happen in Arizona.
Tom, when you worked on the January 6th committee and helped draft that final report, did you think when you were working on the committee that there would be downstream effects of state criminal investigations happening after your committee's work?
Well, you know, I think there should have been these downstream effects. I mean, the bottom line is this is a conspiracy that cut across 7 states, right? Trump and his co-conspirators tried to steal or nullify the electoral votes from 7 states because they lost the popular vote Trump lost the popular vote in those states. This is now the 3rd state, Arizona is, where they brought criminal charges against the co-conspirators, although not Trump himself. And when I was reading this indictment, Chris, to me, it reads like a middle-of-the-road indictment. So remember, in Georgia, you have the RICO conspiracy case where all the way up to Trump is charged in Georgia. In Michigan, you have these charges brought against just the fake electors, but none of the co-conspirators that led them down that path. Now here in Arizona, you have the fake electors charge plus these co-conspirators on top of them, including a number of the people who actually brought them, led them down this false path. Except for Kenneth Chesebro, who Mary notes is an unindicted co-conspirator. He is conspicuously not indicted here, and yet it's his memos really did lay the groundwork for the fake elector scheme. In fact, on the select committee, one of the things I learned after the fact is how much evidence Kenneth Chesebro and his co-conspirators were able to hide from us. They had a December 6, 2020 memo in which Chesebro made it very clear that the intent of the fake electors had nothing to do with being contingent on election litigation outcomes or state legislatures flipping the vote, which, of course, Trump and his associates were pressuring states to do. But in fact, was basically there to gum up the joint session of Congress on January 6th. So this is, I think, necessary for this type of criminal, hopefully criminal accountability in Arizona, and hopefully other states will follow suit.
Yeah, we should just note, and if folks don't remember this, that there were sort of different incarnations of the fake elector scheme. The first of which I think you could characterize as an extremely aggressive but arguably defensible legal posture to retain the possibility of a Donald Trump victory if fraud was found and litigation proved effective. The second version was just purely a bad faith, cynical enterprise to essentially defraud people and to create this sort of screwed up situation. Tom.
But Chris, can I just interject real quick? The bottom line is that when you go through the evidence very carefully, the truth is that first option was off the table by the time the fake electors met and voted. The documents in that Chesbro and his co-conspirators were authoring and talking about, it was clearly aimed at delaying or obstructing the certification of Joe Biden's victory at the joint session of Congress. This is crucially important because of what's happened here, and you can even see this in the indictment that came out today. Some of the defendants lied about it and said, well, we just voted in case, election litigation flipped Arizona. Now, some of the fake electors may very well believe that. The problem is we know the people who were pulling the marionette strings on them did not believe that. And that's why this indictment in Arizona is so important, because they're going upstream, going after some of the puppet masters, not just the fake electors.
By the way, as we roll this tape of that meeting, if you can roll that again, the B-roll that we just had, which is at December 14, 2020, Kelly Ward is the one who's seated at the chair position there in blue. Again, this was all public. It's remarkable how much of the evidence. There's a fair amount of evidence in the indictment itself that's public. You've got Samuel Moorhead, who's writing, we need to take some action about the 2020 election. I advocate in Arizona the legislature decertify the slate of Biden electors and certify the slate of Trump electors. I would hate to go to my grave knowing the electoral vote I cast was not counted. They were doing this in public. And to your point, Mary, I just want to read again from the indictment. We haven't been able to work up graphics, so I will go slowly. One of the things they catch here on page 29, the indictment is sort of in an email to the Tea Party Phoenix Metro email listserv. They say, by the way, to your point about they knew what they were doing, if the Electoral College doesn't result in 270 electoral votes for either presidential candidate, the 12th Amendment is exercised. And guess what? Trump wins because the House didn't go the way Dems counted it going. And our republic is saved from the globalists. So this is all laid out. There's not, again, they were not like that surreptitious about this entire enterprise. It's all fairly well documented, Marion. That's not always the case with most criminal conspiracies, but this one, it's fairly public.
Yes, and like Tom said, I think, it's possible that some of the fake electors in different states at first really did think that there was some legal authority. I mean, they had lawyers telling them to do this, right? And that there was some legal authority. But it's clear when you see the documents by, as Tom referred to them as the puppet masters or the marionette, those pulling the marionette strings, they all along, and it's clear in the documentation, knew this scheme was just a scheme to throw things into chaos, to support putting pressure on the state legislatures to go ahead and just reconvene and send up a slate of electors, which itself would have been subject to legal challenge, of course, or then to pressure Mike Pence to count these illegitimate votes. And worse comes to worse, like you just said, throw things to the 12th Amendment. But I'll say, even with the fraudulent electors, even if they might have, some of them at the beginning thought, maybe this is a legit scheme. As Tom said, by the time they voted, they did not. Yet even after that, we had in Wisconsin someone from the Republican Party flying out to D.C. on January 5th to try to make sure that fraudulent slate got to Mike Pence. And in one of her texts, she says, I feel like a drug dealer, lol.
Wow. Yeah, and wasn't that also where someone passed the list to Ron Johnson to get to Mike Pence? And he was the one carrying it. The senator from Wisconsin was like, I don't know, someone gave me something. I was just giving it to the vice president. I don't really know. Someone gives you a Ziploc bag, you carry it over to the vice president, whatever it's got to be. Can I just say this, Tom? The other thing that strikes me here, two questions. One is, and I'm pulling this from memory if I'm not mistaken, I believe of the 7 states, New Mexico is one of those states, somewhat weirdly. Yeah. I think that 2 of the states, the language of the thing they certified had some kind of legal hedge where they said something like, I think in Pennsylvania and New Mexico, I may not be remembering this correctly, they basically said something along the lines, if the litigation proves successful, yada, yada. And the other ones, there is no hedge. It's straightforward, a lie, a fraudulent certification signed a line saying, we are the proper electors here.
That's exactly right. So 5 of the 7 states had no contingency language whatsoever for the fake electors, Arizona being one of them. And in fact, we know subsequently there was a text exchange from some of the conspirators, including Michael Roman and Kenneth Chesebro. Roman, who I believe is indicted in this indictment, and Kenneth Chesebro, who is an unindicted co-conspirator, where they're talking about this. They're talking about, hey, should we include this language that basically is a hedge on the fake electoral certificates? And Mike Roman says, F these people. In other words, we're not doing it. We're not putting this language on the other ones, because if we do, then maybe people will start to question what they're doing. That's what I mean by puppet masters, right? I mean, some of these guys knew exactly what they were doing. That's not to absolve all the fake electors themselves. Some of them knew what they were doing too, obviously. Perhaps a lot of them did. But the bottom line is that there's in the Trump campaign and the co-conspirators around Trump and Trump himself certainly knew that they were crossing all sorts of boundaries here, legal boundaries here, in doing this. And they were very cavalier in doing so, and they didn't care about people downstream who were willing to do their bidding for them. And that's really part of the story here as well.